Welcome, everyone. I'm Debbie Mathias, Director of the QRIS National Learning Network with the BUILD Initiative. First, this is brought to you by a few announcements. If you have any questions about the announcements, just type your questions in the chat box or raise your hand or send me an email after the session. First of all, as many of you know, we have the 2014 QRIS National Meeting coming up this summer. We're so excited to be able to provide this opportunity again with so many wonderful national partners on July 23rd to 25th, 2014 in Denver, Colorado. We received so many fantastic proposals. We're now going through them to pull together an excellent array of topics and presenters. The sign-ups have gone out, and if you haven't seen it and you're interested in attending, just drop me a line or put it in the chat box and we can provide a link to the registration. But we're really looking forward to engaging deeply in the conversations about crafting high-quality early learning programs and systems building. And like I said, we just received a group of fantastic proposals, so we're really looking forward to it. The next announcement is about the compendium. Many of you know of this work already. Recognizing the need for an updated compendium since the last one was issued in 2010, which is now very out of date because states have been moving so quickly. The BUILD Initiative, in partnership with Child Trends, is beginning to collect current data from states and localities, with the end product being an interactive website where people can pull down reports, compare data, and comparative matrices with multiple QRIS elements. So I get questions all the time. What % of family child care is typically participating in a voluntary QRIS? And these questions are very difficult to answer as the data is always changing. So we're hoping that this new compendium will really help us be able to answer those questions and help states be able to find the answers themselves and most current answers. The next announcement is about our next Let's Talk, which is on Wednesday, April 16th. We're very excited to present a discussion with Marcy Whitebrook and her team from the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment. She's going to be talking about the SEQUEL tool that they've been validating and using within states. It's a supportive environmental quality underlaying adult learning tool. That's what SEQUEL stands for. And it's a multi-purpose tool for examining and improving environments in which early childhood teaching staff work and learn. The SEQUEL assesses how well the workplace supports teaching staff to learn and to continue to develop their knowledge and skills on the job. It's administered directly to teachers and assistant teachers in centers or school-based programs. And it assesses 5 overarching domains, such as the teaching supports, the learning community, job crafting, adult well-being, and program leadership. Each domain examines the policies, practices, and relationships necessary for a high-quality adult learning environment. So we're very excited next month to have Marcy Whitebrook join us for that conversation. Well, we'd like to welcome you to the Let's Talk session, Massachusetts QRIS and NAYC program accreditation, creating alignments for streamlined quality improvement. This series is made possible through the support of the Alliance for Early Success, along with other generous supporters. We began this series for state quality administrators to support their important work within states around early childhood systems building. Quality administrators are welcome to invite other participants as related to the specific topic of the call. And we know a number of you invited your research and monitoring partners to join us. We hope these calls enable us to share challenges, innovation, and promising practices between us. PowerPoints, resources, and the audio presentation will be posted on the QRIS NLN website under the webinar section. After the session, a survey will pop up asking you for your suggestions, resources, or questions that you'd like us to tackle on the calls, and we would appreciate your input. If you're working on a promising practice in your state, send me an email, volunteer to present it, and engage with colleagues around the topic. We want to make this as interactive as possible, and we need your help. We have selected breaks in the presentation to hear about work in your state or for an opportunity for you to ask questions. We have the question and ideas that participants sent with their registration, and we'll intersperse that discussion throughout. We encourage you to be full participants in the session through your comments, questions, and shared experiences. I know I'm starting to write my questions already for Pam and Susan, so please feel free to keep a list and get your questions answered. Simply use the feature on your screen to raise your hand and let us know you want to speak. We'll recognize you and invite you to unmute your phone. Please and we'll do that during a lull in the conversation, so you may wait a few minutes, but then we'll say, Susan has a question, and we'll invite you to come in. Or if you prefer, you can type your question or comment using the chat box feature. You can send it directly to the speaker, or you can share it with the entire group. A few thoughts as we begin our discussion today. The information from this session is coming at a critical time for QRIS development. How can we better leverage the systems together to reduce duplication, support a coherent framework where the multiple program standards are aligned, and programs and communities understand how they work together? This session actually builds on the February session based on differentiated monitoring by Bob Bentley Ponder from Georgia and Rick Feeney, which is housed on the QRIS NLN website under the Webinar tab. Many of us have been crosswalking different accreditation standards, Head Start performance standards, with our QRIS standards to really understand the similarities and differences. This is especially important as we look to make our monitoring systems streamlined, efficient, and sustainable over the long haul. Many of you stated QRIS assessments, including rating of documentary evidence by reliable raters, and that you still continue to work on making that a reliable, valid process. Not just with the observational tools like the ERS or the CLAS or the PASS, which mostly come with professional development and reliability processes, but you're also aiming to establish reliability protocol with the review of evidence and designation of a quality level. And we've heard a lot of great research and processes states are using to get to that point. When we asked in the preliminary questions if you're seeking to clarify the alignment of your state's QRIS system with NAYC accreditation and find ways to reduce duplication and redundancies across the system, there wasn't a respondent who said no. There were states that were not recognizing accreditation or aligning requirements within their QRIS. But it's still important to understand how the systems work together to understand the whole quality system nationally. Many of you went further to describe the alignment work with Head Start, Pre-K, Early Head Start, and other programs that are on the ground in your state. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters and thank them so much for sharing this project and information with us. Pam Rue is an educator and provider of support specialist for the Massachusetts Department of Early Education. And Susan Hedges is the Director of Program Standards and Assessment at NAYC's Academy for Early Childhood Program Accreditation. Pam, I think you're up first, so let's take it away.
Okay, hi. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for quote-unquote attending, and we'll do our best to make it as relevant as we possibly can. So I want to start off by saying some of these slides are really there for some history and perspective. I have to be frank, I'm going to sort of fly through some of the history, knowing that this is all going to be posted and that you'll be able to look at it for yourself. But feel free to sort of raise your hand and stop me at any point that you want to ask some questions or go into any of it a little bit deeper. So in terms of our QRIS history, we started developing our QRIS in 2008. Being Massachusetts, we do everything sort of in the stakeholder way. That's our way here. So we had a group that included everybody across the board, educators from all of our program types, from our mixed delivery system, family child care, our community-based early education and care programs, our public school preschools, our after-school and out-of-school time folks, and our Head Start folks. We had educators, administrators, folks from our family child care systems, researchers, and policymakers. And they all helped us to get together and write our standards. And then we piloted a version in 2009, revised, and we launched shortly thereafter in January 19th, actually, of 2011. So in Massachusetts, we have 3 customized sets of standards. We have standards for our center-based programs, we have standards for our family child care programs, and we have standards for our after-school and out-of-school time programs. We have many of the same categories that you have in your states. We have 5 categories around curriculum and learning, safe, healthy indoor and outdoor environments, workforce qualifications and professional development, family and community engagement, and then leadership, management, and administration. In terms of our participation from our programs, this data I pulled about 3 weeks ago, so it's pretty recent. We have over 5,313 unique programs that are currently participating in QRIS. So those 5,313 programs have generated over 7,600 applications. So some of those have generated additional applications. They've been validated for a particular level and are now have worked on and are applying for higher levels. So that's why you see that duplication in numbers. Of our programs that are participating, over 700 of them are currently nationally accredited, and of those, 555 are accredited in through NAEYC. So of our participating programs, that's more than 50% of our EEC licensed programs statewide are participating. This is just kind of a very, very quick breakdown of our participation by program type in terms of after-school, center-based, and family child care. It very much mirrors our licensing statistics. We have many more, of course, family child care licensed centers, and that's mirrored in terms of our program participation type. So in terms of our participation by region, so in our state we break up sort of for our own organization, we break up the state into 5 general regions that our health and human services agencies all follow, and that these are those 5 regions across the state. And our participation by region very much mirrors the licensing statistics in terms of the numbers of licensed programs across those regions. So everything pretty much mirrors exactly what you would expect in terms of participation. So again, that stuff will all be posted, and if you have additional questions, even after the webinar, you all can contact me and ask about that. So
I have a quick question, Pam.
Yeah, sure.
Are all the licensed programs in the state's QRIS, like as the beginning level, or?
So I think I understand what you're asking. So is it a requirement of licensing? Yeah. It's not a requirement of licensing, but QRIS Level 1 is meeting licensing standards. So all of our EEC licensed programs could easily apply for and be validated for Level 1. Our public school preschool programs to get onto Level 1 have a little bit of additional work to do. There's a special checklist for them because they're not licensed by our agency. They're licensed by our sister agency, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So we have a checklist that they complete, and then they have a visit to verify that they meet our licensing requirements so that they can start their journey and move to level 1 and start working on level 2. Did that answer the question?
That's great. Yes, thank you. I know people will probably send in questions after the fact about how you get that many family child care home and that higher percentage of participation from that group, because many states are facing a challenge with the family child care home participation in particular. So that's great, but many of them feel comfortable coming in because it's a similar standard to licensing, and so they get started, and then it's about improving from there.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of reasons why we have high participation. We have a number of requirements that if you do business with our state above and beyond licensing, so if you have our subsidized children, for example, if you take Head Start supplemental state funds, if you want to be qualified to receive any additional funding, participate in our license plate grants, all of those type of things, or if you want to go after QRIS program improvement funding, then all of those things require participation in QRIS. So I really have to attribute, I know our previous commissioner, Dr. Killens, is on the call today, and we really have to sort of attribute our high level of participation to her vision on this in the beginning of QRIS, and sort of the whole piece that we put together around providing support to those programs through our educator and provider support, which is our mechanism for conducting professional development. We put a lot of time into supporting those programs and basically into turning on those levers for participation.
It seems like you really did leverage everything you had available to encourage participation. We have a question from the chat box. Are your school district sites monitored and held accountable by the school districts, and can they receive the CCDF funds without being licensed?
So I assume that you're referring to our public school preschools, and they are accountable to our elementary and secondary ed partners, and they are licensed through the elementary and secondary ed. Although they don't call it licensing, they call it something else, accredited, but they're monitored through the elementary and secondary ed. But they participate, we consider them part of our early education and care mixed delivery system, and they participate in many of the things we do, not the least of which is because, quite frankly, our public school preschool partners often tell us that the professional development offered by their districts may not meet the needs of people who are serving young children. It's not centered on the kinds of things that they would need to do to develop their skills and abilities to serve younger children.
Now, I bet they can't receive the CCDF funds unless they get licensed, though, right? Like the subsidy.
I have to be honest, I don't know. I don't think they're on the receiving end of CCDF funds, but they do receive other types of funds. They receive supplemental SPED funds. They're eligible for all our other types of grants and funding that we do in our mixed delivery system here. We work very closely because we're all part of one education secretariat. We work very, very closely with our other partners in our educational secretariat, our elementary and secondary ed, and our higher ed partners.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for letting us take a few moments for questions, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, no, that's no problem, and everybody does things differently. Personally, I have no problem at any point with anybody sort of throwing up a question or doing a stop, interrupt at any point, so no problem.
Thank you.
So one of the questions we get a lot when we go to other states is, how does Massachusetts have the number of NAEYC accredited programs in our state? We have the most number of NAEYC accredited programs in our state, and there's definitely some reasons for that. So first of all, we have very high licensing requirements, specifically and especially our licensing ratios, which are very much aligned with NAEYC ratios. So it's not as large of an impact on the bottom line of a program. It's not as big of a lift for programs that are licensed in Massachusetts to go from where they are in licensing to NAEYC. We do our subsidies, our support of and access for children on EEC subsidies through a couple of mechanisms. One, we have vouchers, and the other thing that we do is we actually contract with programs to provide slots so that we have a stable population of slots for our children. Those programs, through an actual procurement that we do that have contracted slots, are required to be NAEYC accredited. So we've also done quite a bit of support throughout the years. We've really concentrated a lot of support. Like many of you, we have one of those special license plates, a Teach Children license plate that's specific in Massachusetts, and that money goes to fund education in our state. So we have that license plate funding that we've used for support. And our mechanism for delivering professional development, which we really also can attribute to our previous commissioner, Dr. Killens, is our educator and provider support funding. So our network of support that we deliver professional development have very much really focused on program improvement, including NAEYC accreditation. So I think we're very lucky, and there's really is, though, a reason that we have that many licensed programs. So I'm actually going to advance the slide, and before I turn it over to Susan, just pause briefly to ask if anybody has any questions before I turn over for a few slides to Susan Hedges, my partner from NAEYC. And I'm going to take that silence as consent to move on to Susan.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Hi, everybody.
Sure.
This is Susan Hedges, who does not have control over slide advancement, so I'll be saying, please advance slide every so often. NAEYC does, in fact, have a huge presence in Massachusetts. Here's a little snapshot as we did this project from last November. 841 currently accredited programs in Massachusetts. And in the previous 12 months, a number of more programs in the pipeline, so to speak. 87 programs in the first step of accreditation enrollment, an additional 69 in the application step, 53 submitting candidacy materials, which is our third step, and 106 programs that are currently accredited going through renewal in Massachusetts. So if you'll advance the slide. We missed one. Yeah, thank you. We want to point out as we start this project that there's really parallel structures between Massachusetts QRIS, and I'm sure most QRISs, and NAEYC's process, which is a four-step process, and has a little bit of leveling to it as well. As Pam said, level 1 is in Massachusetts is license regulated, and you came and signed up. NAEYC, when people enroll, they participate in a self-study, and it's really kind of without further commitment. They can actually self-study and not pursue accreditation if they want. They can just make use of self-study materials. In level 2 of the Massachusetts QRS, they conduct and submit self-assessments of various kinds, self-observations using various instruments, document review, and they start getting their staff qualifications into the state registry. In the second step with NAEYC, programs do commit to a process that they hope will lead to accreditation, and they start a self-assessment process where they are also self-observing, self-rating, and starting to put together documentation in the form of portfolios. And as you probably know, we have a program portfolio, and we also have classroom portfolios that we ask teaching staff to put together. In our third step, as they qualify for a candidate, we confirm that they're licensed or regulated. That's the point at which we look closely at documentation. So license and regulatory documentation comes in at that time. Also, staff qualification standards are looked at and classified at that time. And programs have to meet a minimum staff qualification standard to be able to be a candidate for accreditation. There's sometimes some confusion about how staff qualifications work in NAEYC. This is where there's really like a two-level issue. We have a criteria about how qualified in an ideal world teaching staff should be, lead teachers and teaching assistants, but we know that many, many programs are aspiring but not at those levels, and so we have a lower level of qualification, which is at this candidate level that people have to meet, and so people can come into the system having met that lower standard, and they can become accredited if they are not meeting ideal staffing standards, as long as they meet many other things around how they work on their staff training. And then finally, in levels 3 and 4 in Massachusetts, there are reliable rater visits, and there's evaluation of documentary evidence on site. When we do site visits, we also evaluate documents on site. We collect family and teaching staff surveys, which is really a form of self-assessment. And we do, of course, classroom and program observations with our assessors who are reliable raters. It's really, this project is focusing on the documentary evidence evaluation that we do and that Massachusetts needs to do. Advanced slide. So the other thing to note is that the content is very much related. NAEYC has it organized into 10 standards. Massachusetts has it organized into 5 categories. But there's really pretty much complete overlap between the 2 sets of standards. It maps pretty directly. Pam's now going to talk about how we assess those content relationships for this project and then what we did with them. So take it back, Pam.
Okay, I'm back. So the approach to this project in the beginning was, before we had launched our QRIS, we hired Education Development Center, EDC, to perform a crosswalk of the alignment between the Massachusetts QRIS and the current accreditation system. So they did it for NAEYC, for the Family Child Care Accreditation, and for COA for after-school programs. So based on that, we made some decisions in our state that accredited programs don't need to provide additional backup documentation for items that directly align with one of those 3 accreditation systems. So remember, in the beginning I had said that we had 3 specific sets of standards for 3 specific sets of program types. So one of the things to note, though, is that they still overall need to score highly enough on their measurement tools, on the environment rating scales for their program, on the CLAS or the Arnett or the BASPAS or APT to be able to move up in a level. So this is just sort of an example. We have for each of our program types, and you can find this on our website in our QRIS resource section, we have an application, a paper-based application that looks very much like our online QRIS program manager that folks who, maybe like I am, who love technology and I'm happy to do everything online, but grew up in an age before computers and still like to carry everything on my clipboard. So we made this document for those folks, and you can see, based on, we just pulled one of those pages out of the document, in our standard 1A.3.3, this, through that study, was shown to correlate directly, so they don't need to provide additional documentation. If they were not NAEYC accredited, they would still need to provide that additional documentation under the measurement method. But because they're NAEYC accredited here, they simply have to click off in our system, NAEYC accredited, and they're not required to provide that additional backup documentation. So going into this, the reasons that we really approached this project were some of the probably same questions that you are hearing from the folks in the field in your own states, which are, here we have this QRIS system and we have this NAEYC system. How do those systems fit together? Are they the same? Why do 2 separate systems? If I'm accredited, why would I do QRIS or vice versa? Or time fiscal management piece for both systems? From our point of view, we also wanted to know, we did this crosswalk with EDC before sort of QRIS was launched. Are we confident that that content alignment from the crosswalk would be supported when actual folks did the work and we actually went out to do the ratings of our program? We wanted to see how we could reduce the duplication and redundancy between the 2 systems. And also, how can we help strengthen both those systems? They really both have the same overall goal of increased program quality. And really for us, one of the biggest asks here is, how do we really reduce that duplication? Programs are saying the same things to us as I think that they're saying to you, which is, it takes so much time to do this and it takes so much time to do that. Why do I have to do both? So how can we help those programs that are working within both of those systems? So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan. I don't see any additional questions being typed in right now. So, Susan?
Thank you. So just going on with our project goals, we a pilot study. It's a small-scale project, and it considered exploratory, but I think we got a lot of distance out of what we did. Initially, we sought to create protocols for joint site visits between for EEC evidence rating needs and NAYC evidence rating needs for documentary evidence. Identify equivalent documentary evidence. As Pam said, knowing that you have content parallels and content overlap isn't the same thing as knowing that you do actually see the same evidence and that you evaluate it in the same way. On the NAYC side, we were looking at program and classroom portfolios, and initially we thought we'd be looking at family and teaching staff survey responses. That actually dropped out for various reasons. So the focus here really is going forward on the portfolio evidence. And Massachusetts was understanding if we could provide reports as a result of this rating effort to direct state technical assistance efforts, so that if we had a rating task like this, could the outcome be something that could be picked up and carried on the TA side to continue quality improvement more thoroughly. Subsequently, we asked, could NAYC tailor its site visit in Massachusetts to make sure they assess the NAYC criteria that are aligned with the state's QRS systems. As you may know, when we do a site visit, we don't assess every single criterion in our system. We sample from them, which means that for different states, if we really did want to work with making sure we address the evidence that's most important to that state, we'd have to be able and willing to alter our sampling for certain states, maybe tailor it so we could make sure we cover what they want covered. Can we develop a joint process? And can we establish rater reliability between NAYC and state QRS raters? In other words, do we approach the evidence the same? Do we see the same thing? What are our expectations for evidence? And this actually turned out to be a very, very interesting process as we worked through it on the ground. Go to the next slide. Somebody. Okay. We expected the project benefits in Massachusetts would be to kind of verify the evidence-based crosswalk of the intersections of the two systems' content, to possibly develop guidance about how the documentary evidence meets both systems, and we're going to talk more about that, and to take an integrated approach to quality improvement, which ultimately would eliminate administrative burden. I think we're all very, very conscious on both sides of the need to make this work for programs and to bring the best of these systems together in a way that doesn't feel burdensome for the programs. Nationally, we hope that this project would inform continuous improvement to both our systems, and that Massachusetts would be able to inform the national dialogue about how you go about integrating level enhancement features. Next slide. Okay, so as the way we started this project, as Pam said, they already commissioned a crosswalk. When NAYC came in on this project, we worked with the EEC staff to review the crosswalk and confirm some of it, ask some questions, do some clarification. And we've particularly focused in on crosswalking documentary evidence, which again is the subject of this particular pilot study, especially because through observational measures which were not, at issue right now. So next slide. So what we did specifically is we recruited 20 Massachusetts center-based or school-based programs that last year, and this study was conducted in the late spring and through the summer and into the early fall. 20 programs that were awaiting an NAYC site visit for first-time accreditation or for renewal. And they also had to be programs that were enrolled in the QRIS and waiting for a visit for level 2, 3, or 4. Initially, we had hoped to focus on just level 3 and 4 programs that were awaiting a reliable rater visits. Despite what we just said about how many programs are in the QRIS and how many are in accreditation, when you start crossing them in terms of programs awaiting renewal or original visits within a short time frame, it wasn't that many programs, and we needed to accept level 2 programs too, because not that many, relatively few, relative to how many overall programs are enrolled, relatively few were level 3, 4 programs. Level 2 allowed us a larger catchment for recruitment. So those are the programs. Advance, please. Somebody advance. Okay. And what we did, the project was conducted as joint visits by NAYC assessors and EEC staff. A total of 10 NAYC assessors participated in various of these visits, and 7 EEC staff, mostly program quality specialists, participated in the visits. So two NAYC assessors conducted each visit and did observations together. We used an expanded research protocol where we did in fact observe and rate documentary evidence for every single criterion in our system. So that's why we use it. We basically use assessors for this. The visit is scored for accreditation decision the same as any other site visit. Even though we collect more data, we only score a subset of it, the same data that we would have sampled at any other program. But the assessors, in addition to rating program and classroom portfolios for NAYC criteria, the assessors also rated that document evidence as to whether it meets the related QRS criteria for which documentary evidence is required. Now, the EEC specialists, one specialist joined each NAYC visit. They didn't stay for the whole visit. They arrived just for the document rating part. They looked at the same NAYC document evidence that assessors were looking at, so no additional evidence was assembled for this. And this is because there were level 2 programs in the assessment, and they're not required to assemble their document evidence. So we did not want to ask participants to have to assemble evidence specifically for QRIS criteria. So the question here was, could you use the NAYC document evidence exclusively to rate QRIS criteria? So we compared ratings. The specialists compared their ratings with those of the NAYC assessors and discussed rating differences right there on site. That was part of the protocol. Next slide. So we compared ratings to start to explore iterator reliability and establish it, and also to understand when we didn't agree, why didn't we agree, what was missing. Could you develop guidance that would bridge the gap between the understandings that these two kinds of raters had of the evidence? Ultimately, NAYC assessors used NAYC scoring rules on this jointly rated data to decide about NAYC accreditation. The rating of QRS data did not have any impact on the NAYC decision, and in turn, the EEC staff will use their own rules to decide if what they rated looking at this evidence is sufficient for them to consider the documentary evidence requirements for level 3 or 4 document evidence met. Go ahead to the next slide. Oh, okay, question time.
Hi, this is Deb. We did have a question in the box, and it pertains to this. Let me just go back to this slide for a minute.
Yeah, it pertains to slide 15.
Good. Can you talk about it, Tam?
Sure. So the question, in case everybody can't see it, is around this self-assessment form here with the box where it shows NAEYC accreditation. So the question is, are there some indicators or measures in the system for which the checkbox NAEYC accreditation and or Head Start accreditation is not available? Is it only an option for observed indicators measurements? Yes. If our indicator did not directly crosswalk with a requirement in NAEYC through this work that had been done by EDC, then that is not an option for them. So this is only an option for those indicators that directly crosswalk to NAEYC. That's correct.
And
so
I just
did that fully answer the question, or?
I think it sounds like it did. But follow
Okay.
up in the chat box if there's more, or raise your hand if you want to jump in here. One point I'd like to make there about what you just said is sometimes even if there is a good crosswalk between the QRIS and accreditation, it is required to provide evidence anyway. Let me give you an example. Even though we know that folks have to do an annual CQI plan for NAYC, sometimes the states have decided that they want to see it anyway. So rather than providing that box, they still want to observe what that document looks like and have it in their records or uploaded in the portfolio. Other types of things that might not crosswalk sometimes include administrative data. In some QRISs, it's, for example, a requirement that the staff participate in the registry. And so things like that might be left to be documented or observed anyway. So there are a lot of different reasons, and definitely in this case, if they crosswalk closely, you might not have it. But in some instances, you might decide you still want to see it. All right, so any other questions?
So there's a question around how many indicators are not crosswalked. I think, so they were all crosswalked. The question is, when EDC did the crosswalk, was there a direct correlation to our particular indicator or our item that we could directly tie towards an NAEYC item that they asked for? So I don't know the exact number. I could actually get a count. It's different in each one of those systems. So for center-based, obviously it's the NAEYC accreditation, which we're kind of focusing on today. And the numbers of indicators that did directly crosswalk are different, certainly than the one for family child care in their system and the one for after school and out of school time. I don't know, Anne asked, other than assessment scores, what would not be in Massachusetts QRS? There are a few things that are not in there other than just the assessment tools. For example, specific types of professional development that we require folks to have that aren't necessarily required in the NAEY system, or specific types of qualifications that we ask for in our QRS. So those types of things.
So yeah, what you're saying, Pam, is anything that's kind of a state-specific requirement like that, where it might not be something that a national group would put into their standards. Okay, that's great.
We also see, state-approved curriculum that, that's specific to the state, although generally what we see states approving as curriculum are curriculum that meet the general curriculum standards for NAYC also.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's great. Okay, who's next?
Back to me, I guess, if you could.
Okay, great.
For 22. Go ahead. You have to advance it to slide 22.
24, I think it is, yeah.
We're on 22 now. Would you like to be on 24?
No, 22. Oh, my 22, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, the next one, right. Okay, that one, good. Okay, so indeed, all the, it was true that not every standard in the state's QRIS that called for documentary evidence was something that overlapped with NAYC documentary evidence. I don't have the exact number here, but I think it was about 80%, though. 80% of the QRIS criteria for level 3 and 4 did have related criteria in NAYC. So what we did in this task is we did a total of 58 evidence ratings independently. So on these visits, the NAYC assessor rated the evidence, made 58 evidence ratings, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. And the EEC specialist made them also, and they compared the ratings after, but they made them independently. Of these 58 evidence ratings, 32 QRAS criteria were rated using the NAYC document evidence. 29 in the program portfolio evidence, 4 in the classroom portfolio evidence, and 1 in, and because sometimes we have multiple sources of evidence, and it happened that one criterion actually looked at both program and classroom portfolios. Evidence from 39 different NAYC criteria was reviewed to make those QRAS ratings. That's how we get to a total of 58 evidence ratings. There's overlap in both directions. If you'll go to the next slide, I've got a couple of illustrations that I think make it clearer how this looked. So here's an example of related criteria that were rated together. For this one NAYC criterion, 10E06, which is about, it's in our leadership and management standard, and it's about personnel policy. The program offers benefits packages. It was used to rate 2 different QRS criteria, both of them in Category 5, which is leadership and management. Staff receive at least 1 benefit, paid vacation time, sick time, health insurance, tuition, PD reimbursement, or retirement plan, and that's a level 3 criterion. And then the level 4 criterion, program offers a benefit package that includes vacation, sick time, and health insurance. You can see that the same, like if you picture, well, what evidence would people be putting together for this NAYC criterion? The evidence they would be showing would certainly be evidence that would be addressing the QRS criteria, but you see that they're organized a little bit differently in terms of if you would ultimately rate the NAYC criterion met versus ultimately rating the others, because each of them have somewhat different mix. If you go to the next example on the next slide, it sometimes worked the other way. Sometimes a single QRS criterion was rated with reference to evidence in more than one place on the NAYC side. So here we have the QRS criterion about educators are provided with opportunities to use outside consultants, and it maps to parts of 2 different NAYC criteria. Actually, I think a third that's not on this slide. But 3B12, that's the teaching standard, includes that teachers address challenging behavior by convening professionals to help develop plans to address it. And 8A05 speaks generally to, this is about community relationships, including partnerships, and it's about the program establishing relationships with consultants who can come in as needed. So that's kind of an example of how we wound up doing 58 separate ratings on a smaller number of criteria. If you'll go to the next slide. So the question being asked in the data analysis, so we did these 20 visits and we looked at all these ratings, we looked at the discussions. We started by asking, can NAYC document evidence be used to rate QRS criteria? And the first question you would ask is, are the criteria basically equivalent? If you passed one, would you pass the other? For the NAYC criteria that were rated, the average pass rate on the NAYC side was 85%, with a range among those 39 criteria across the 20 programs. The pass rate for those criteria was 33 to 100%. The QRS criteria pass rates were rated, remember, by 2 different raters. The NAYC assessors had a 58% pass rate average when rating the QRS criteria. The EEC specialists had a 50% pass rate average. So if you had to ask that question, the answer to the question, if you pass the NAYC criteria, would you pass the QRS criteria, it's mostly no. Like in the examples that we gave just a minute ago, there are a few criteria that are very close in content, but not exactly equivalent in where they draw the line at what must be met. So the criteria pass rates for the QRS criteria were not as high as the NAYC criteria pass rates. Keep in mind, though, that this evidence was assembled to meet the NAYC criteria and not the QRS criteria. So this is one question to ask. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll see that the next question you'd ask is, okay, if the criteria are not equivalent, is it nevertheless the case that NAYC evidence includes information you would need to rate QRS criteria? So for this, we looked at how much of the time were they able to make a rating? Were the raters able to make some rating of yes or no, met or not met? And keep in mind also that sometimes the QRS criteria weren't met, but sometimes that evidence didn't support the NAYC criterion either. So sometimes it was kind of not good evidence all around. But 91% of the time, the QRS criteria could be rated from the evidence, yes or no. The raters were also allowed to not rate it or indicate they were just not sure. And of course, these things led to discussions about what the problem was. But most of the time, they could make ratings. Another thing we wanted to note is that although we tried to identify the NAYC criteria and hence the evidence that we thought was most likely to relate to these criteria, so the raters would go to these certain places in the portfolios, they saw evidence in other parts of the portfolios that also supported the QRS ratings, and those were parts of the notes they made. Often one or both raters would say, I didn't see it at the place where we went to look for it, at the supposedly matching criteria, but as I was flipping through the portfolio on my way to that, I did see the evidence, and so clearly this program does this, and it does meet. On the next slide, we asked, what is the inter-rater agreement for these two types of raters? Do NAYC, this answers the question that we posed in the front, do NAYC assessors and QRS specialists agree on how to rate this evidence? The inter-rater reliability was 66% for ratings made in the program portfolio and 63% for ratings made in the classroom portfolios, which is not great, but it's not bad as a start, actually. We also did a correlation between the raters, looking across the 20 programs, the correlation between, for the 32 QRS ratings, criteria rated, correlation between the pass rates from the two raters, and they correlated 82%. That shows that even though raters didn't always agree on their ratings, there was a strong relationship between the two types of raters on the rates at which these criteria tended to pass or fail. Beyond the numbers, we looked very much at what was discussed and what we kind of learned along the way in answer to the questions of what kinds of issues affected rater agreement and what do we understand in a larger sense from this data and from this project. And I'm going to hand it back to Pam to talk about that.
Okay. So before I move on past the Let's Talk slide, there is a question. So somebody has asked in terms of context, in our state, do our QRS raters, who are our program quality specialists that work for EEC, do they do all of their documentation review in person on site at the program being rated? Where is that? So it's a combination of things, and it's different at different levels. So, and actually we're working on a bit of a change in that. So currently the way it stands is at all of those levels we start out with what we call a desk review. We have an online QRS program manager where people put in the preponderance of what they need, and we're actually going to be upgrading our program, our QRS program manager that will allow them to even put in more documentation. So currently they can answer a lot of these questions online. They can put in their scores, their measurement scores, and soon they'll also be able to put in things like their program improvement plan, answer text, and do some other things. One of the things that's going to be changing as we go along is we're looking at sort of a differentiated model for Level 2. So remember, in our state, Level 1 meets licensing requirements. So to move up from Level 1 to Level 2, they'll be doing the documentation from a desk review, basically. So the program specialist will be at EEC looking online at the program manager and looking at any backup documentation that they've put in. And there'll be a differentiated model for identifying at level 2 which of those programs also need an additional site visit for us to feel confident. And then at level 3 and 4, it's a desk review first and then a visit by a program specialist. And then the final piece is a visit by the environment rating scale rater as well. So I think that maybe was more than you asked, but I think that answers the question.
That's really great, Pam. Thanks for filling that in. So you're moving in a direction that many states have as they get to scale within the state, which is how can we have a lighter touch at the lower level with a focus on the quality improvement plan and the supports about improving, and get more confidence at the higher levels. I had a question. Do you check with licensing too at that level 2 one? Is that an indicator that would give you pause to go visit as well as do the desk audit?
There is. So there's multiple checks that we do. So for one thing, our system first checks that their licensing is good and in good standing. The second piece is our program quality specialists, the folks that do that work on QRIS, they actually sit out in each of our regional offices that also houses our licensing specialists. So one of the things they do in their desk review is they actually open up the licensing manager, which is also an online application, and they look at licensing manager. They then connect with the licensing specialist for that program as well. So yes, they're very much in touch with the licensing folks. They sit in on the monthly meetings, and they have I think a really good beat on the pulse of programs through the eyes of licensing.
Thank you. That's great.
Sure. So I'm going to now go ahead and move on to the next slide. So these are some of the things that this sort of learned. So that we sort of started learning from this. One of the things I have to say is sort of the timing of this project was really fortuitous to us. So one of the things that when we launched our QRIS that we always said that our commissioner at the time really always stressed is that when we got to our 3rd year that would be our review year, that we would thoughtfully bring that whole stakeholder team back together and look at all of those things, see what's working, what's not working, and review all of those things. And here we are in the midst of that. So this project really preceded that, and it sort of helped us identify, highlight, and really work on some of those different pieces that we're doing now. So right now, before I even start sort of on those lessons, I will say that we're in that review year. We've convened a QRIS work group that's looking at all the standards. We have a specific group, subcommittee of that's looking just specifically at those items that require professional development. And we have our subcommittee of our board, our policy subcommittee, helping us also to look at that. And then we have some internal groups. Our program quality specialists have really been doing a lot of the work on looking at these process lessons. And we also have a legal team here and a legal specialist that's been dedicated to that. So some of the things that we as a unit here internally at EUC really identified was sort of the process lessons around here. So one of the first things we realized is that we really have to be specific about what we're asking for from programs around our criteria. So what is our guidance that we're giving them? How do we rate our criteria? How do we deal with things like incomplete or missing evidence? Do we have a follow-up interview? How much time do we get after that to provide more evidence? So those are some of the questions that our program quality specialist group internally have really taken up in terms of all of that. So one of the other things that we really look for is the guidance and the various types of forms that guidance can take. So, we have to look at our rating options. When is a criterion, for example, not applicable to a program because there are certain circumstances? A good example of that just comes to mind quickly is we have a particular criteria in our family child care standards that calls for supervision of their family child care assistants. So that's a criteria that there may be a not applicable because not all of our family child care programs have an assistant.
Good. Hey, I need to.
Hi, whoever that is should probably consider muting themselves. Whoever is talking on the call right now.
Spring break.
Sorry, folks, I can't identify who that is. Maybe somebody else can, but that's not me talking. Anyway, and how to articulate really what is not applicable, because one of the things we all struggle with is when we put things like not applicable, we have to make sure that people understand what the circumstances are, or else everybody seems to choose not applicable. So we have to really look at things like giving examples of evidence, exemplars of how they can meet the criteria. I'm sorry, I really don't know who that is chatting.
Pam, I'm going to go ahead and hard mute everyone, so you're going to have
okay.
You're going to have
sorry.
to use,
it's not on our end, and it's exceedingly distracting.
No, absolutely. I'm going to mute everyone. Presenters, to unmute yourself after this happens, you'll need to use *7.
The conference has been muted.
Okay, am I back?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I'm now assuming that you all can now hear me. Okay, so we also needed to look in our guidance at what's the intent of the criterion to help programs really understand what we're looking for, and to think about things like having a definition of terms used within the criterion. So, sorry. In terms of the various forms, we really have to look at having our guidance creation as an ongoing process. So making sure that everybody in the field and sort of everybody internally knows that there's a structure for all these things, and considering issues so that we have a structure for updating our guidance in an ongoing way to think about those things. So some of the other things that it really brought to the forefront for us were some of the protocols. So thinking about a process for continuous improvement of our QRIS system, including things like the reliability of our program quality specialists. So they've already started working together on becoming reliable to each other. And one of the things that really helped us is looking at how NAEYC and their years of experience in doing this really approached this, this particular issue. So looking at having these continuous communication systems, how do we continue to keep people faithful to this through training and continuous monitoring? And I have to say this project has really helped them to think about the framework for that. Thinking about the protocols for how the visit is conducted, watching NAEYC, certainly many of us have been on the receiving end of an NAEYC visit, but I really hadn't had the opportunity to go along with NAEYC specialists and really see how robust their protocols are for every aspect of approaching the visit, and that really helped us internally to think about those, including things like the professional practices, any possible conflict of interest guidelines, and other kinds of forms and worksheets that would help guide us. And actually our unit has been working really, really hard on putting all of those protocols and pieces into place. One of the other things that we had begun that this process really helped us sort of bring to the forefront and really identify is the appeal process. So when and under what circumstances can a program appeal a decision? What's the sort of threshold or gateway? What's the formal process they need to go through? Who then decides the appeal? Is it internal? Is it a board? Is it a mix of those? And then how do appeal decisions inform our knowledge about the process in general? And then the other important thing to think about is how we gather feedback about all of this. So after we do a visit, are we asking those participating programs how they feel about our process? Do they feel that the outcomes are fair? And do they have any suggestions for improvement? And then are we asking internally of our staff and our program quality specialists, What's difficult for them to carry out in the system? Where do they need more clarification? And do they think the outcomes are fair? So all of them have a lot of deep knowledge about program quality. And if they're going into programs and rating them, and their rating comes out different sort of than what the gut feeling was that they got from the program, then that's something that we need to think about and we need to look at. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan, but I'm not confident that Susan knows how to unmute.
Yes, she does. It's *7.
Okay, so Susan, are you there? Okay, I think you've lost her.
*7 works for any participant or presenter, so when the hard mute is on, so that should be okay. Susan, do you want to give it a test?
*7?
There you
Correct.
go.
I just did give it a test, and instead it read back a long menu of options to me.
Well, we
hear
can
me?
hear you now. It worked.
Thank you. That's where you lost me. It was reading stuff to me. Okay. So, Pam?
Yep, this is you.
It is? Okay. So among the process lessons are, we're on improvement? No, we're on the next steps. Could we advance the slide, please?
No, this is you, but I'll take your slide if you like. So in 2006, NACCE launched a revised evidence-based system, and they were feeling like they were in the same place that we were, which is sort of building the bicycle while riding it. So one of the things I think that this project really helped us really tackle was that feeling of launching something new and that phase sort of being unavoidable for any QRIS system, and sort of just saying at some point you have to launch, hold on to your hat, take a big breath and leap, because if you're waiting for perfect, sort of that's never going to happen. So that there always has to be these structures for continuous improvement, and knowing that if you're waiting for perfect to launch something new or to do any modifications in your system, that's just never going to happen. And from our perspective, I think that really helped to look at it that way.
Okay. So
I want to ask, I just want to make one comment. This is Deb. What you were talking about there, Pam, about how doing the visits together really helped you see maybe some areas you were missing in your protocols, or refine, or strengthen your protocols. That was very interesting. The tension between wanting the exact documentary and observable evidence versus programs meeting the philosophy or intent of a standard in another way is an interesting, tension there, I think, because in some ways we're not trying to get to a cookie-cutter approach where every program looks and feels exactly the same. We want, to leave some openness to how that's crafted and looked at and done.
Right.
At the same time, both programs and designators, or the people looking at the sources of evidence, clamor for more and more description and definition around what exactly do you want in this standard, But sometimes I worry that it leads people away from, some of the practice that might work in a different type of a culture or a neighborhood, or, you know what I mean, for a program that indeed does meet the standard but isn't exactly the way we hammered out we're going to look for the. How are you guys wrestling with that tension?
So I think we've been having a quadrillion meetings in all kinds of configurations internally. We've also not only had help from NAEYC, but we've had help from our partners at UMass Donahue Institute who are doing some research projects and have sort of that research mind. And then our program quality specialists who are doing the work out in the field. And then, of course, the stakeholders internally in our board that are helping us to look at that. But I think that's exactly right, that we're not trying to make it cookie cutter, and that we're trying to really leave sort of a really robust framework with enough flexibility that different programs types can shine in ways that that may be their strengths. So I think that's something that we're all struggling with, the sort of tightrope between allowing that flexibility while still saying that it has to meet certain things. So I think for me, one of the things that helps with that is providing the robust guidance around different examples to really give them permission to understand that it may not be one cookie-cutter answer we're looking for, but we're looking for what do they do in their program to answer a particular criteria. How are they looking, for instance, to improve their program? How have they looked at the results of their measurement tools and then their surveys that they've done with their families and strengthening families, and put those together in a meaningful way to start thinking about their improvement. So it's not a one, shoe-fits-all scenario, but it's a struggle.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. That's just a great perspective on it, and I appreciate what you're saying.
We've had that issue too at NAYC, and it really is an ongoing issue. When we first launched our reinvented system and we had all these best practice standards, we would say, there are many, many ways you could be meeting this quality standard, and then we were asking people to prepare these portfolios, and people would be begging us, just tell me what you want us to put in there, just tell us. And we kind of backed off for a long time providing examples, and we were clearly driving people crazy. So we did develop more examples, and we did talk in more examples, because a well-chosen example can convey the point anyway. But another way of looking at this is the tension between reliability and validity. When you want to try to hone it down, it's so that everybody can agree if it's got to be rated. Everybody can agree what it is. But you can do that to an extent where you can't respect the differences that different programs can bring to approaching the same valid kind of quality practice. And so that is a necessary tension that's going to exist all the time in this rating process, which is one reason that you do want to have continuous quality improvement systems and consistent feedback, so that people come back. One of your specialists comes back and says, I saw something in a program this time, never seen it done quite like this. I think it was okay, but can we all talk about this and decide how we would all be rating it? We have that all the time in our system, and I expect everybody has that all the time in their system. And so you do want to kind of keep adjusting things as you go along, and just be prepared to do that.
I also think that, this is Pam, sorry, that we're working hard with all the people that support QRIS in our state, from our educator and provider support folks that are doing coaching and mentoring with those programs, to our QRIS program quality staff in our regions, our EEC staff doing the work, to really help programs take a step back and not view QRIS as items to click off in a checkbox.
Yeah.
But really to view this as a framework and a system to help improve their program quality and strengthen their program quality.
Well, that's just a great response. Thank you so much for taking the time to share those great opinions. Okay, on to next steps. Is that you, Susan?
Yeah, that's me, and I'm sure it's me. So just give me the slide. Okay. So the question we started with, one of them, can NAYC document evidence be used to rate QRS criteria? Well, it led us to some other questions and some next steps, and a lot of things. This whole, working with Pam's very excellent rating staff, and it was really a privilege to come into all these programs in Massachusetts and to work through these issues. It really made us think about a lot of possibilities also for how NAYC could be working with QRIS systems. If our evidence does not completely cover what a QRIS system is looking for, could programs be instructed to provide, if programs going through NAYC accreditation, could they be instructed to provide some additional detail with their NAYC portfolio evidence that would really just put it over the top and make it possible to rate? Very often when we had difficulties with these ratings, we were very close. The evidence was very close. The understandings were very close. It wouldn't take much more to get us to the point where what they provided was sufficient and made it easy to rate both kinds of criteria. Could NAYC assessors rate that enhanced evidence for QRIS? Yeah, I think we could, and we would be willing to do so. That's something that came out of us. We can be boots. We are boots on the ground. In fact, in Massachusetts, we have like 7 assessors who live in Massachusetts, who do a lot of Massachusetts visits, are very experienced with those programs. For the rest of you around the country, we have assessors in many, many other states too, who become very familiar with their territories and very experienced with what they see typically in your state about how certain things are met. So we have experienced people that could maybe come in and do some of the evidence rating on the document evidence side and maybe provide other things too. Next slide. Can NAYC collaborate with QRIS systems on program evaluation and information exchange? NAYC can work with states to integrate QRIS document ratings into the NAYC rating process. This project showed us it can be done. We would start with content crosswalks. The really interesting and valuable part of this pilot project was the part where we established shared understandings of the content as rated with the EEC specialists, so we know we can do that. And we could develop the guidance for programs about specific evidence that meets in both systems. Next slide. Pam talked about a lot of the lessons learned in terms of systems processes. So can NAYC be a resource for state systems as they build out these ancillary processes? We've worked out a lot of processes over the years we've been doing accreditation, especially with our evidence-based reinvention, but we've had an appeals process in place for many, many, many years, for example. We've learned the value of communications and feedback processes among stakeholders, and developing protocols that enhance the reliability of ratings and decisions. And these aren't just about how you rate, it's about how you approach the whole visit to assure that you've set the environment for consistent ratings and fair approaches to assessing every program. And as we talked about, continuous system improvement processes. We know how to do all these things, and we would be happy to help states if they're looking for advice or feedback or partnership on working with things like that. Next slide. Another thing that we're looking for, and I know states are looking for too, is NAYC seeks partners to validate NAYC rating processes. These are observational rating processes, among others, against environment rating scales, class, PAS, and other scales. We know we need to establish the clear relationships. We're all going to benefit if we can quantify these relationships between NAYC assessment tools and these commonly used published instruments. There's very clear content overlap between the instruments, but as we say, the content overlap is just the starting point. We need to see how they perform when rated side by side and understand equivalencies in terms of levels and cut points. Like sometimes you're rating the same thing, but then if you cut the difference between met and not met at a slightly different point, you agree on what you saw, but you might draw a different conclusion depending on where you draw the line. And clarifying some of that is part of this process too. We'd like people to feel comfortable, states to feel comfortable meeting some of their capacity issues with NAYC group ratings if they could feel comfortable that they understood how they were equivalent to these other things. So go to the next slide. NAYC is in the middle of doing data system enhancements this year and next year, which we hope will support greater quality improvement power. It's going to give us more flexibility and precision to do some things that we think would be of interest to QRIS systems or complement them or maybe be able to work cooperatively with them. So our family and teaching staff surveys will be fully automated, and I could see prospectively sharing those with state technical assistance efforts because they are good surveys, especially if they're done directly into a data system. So for instance, if teaching staff surveys do not pass through the hands of a program administrator but come directly into the data system, they could be giving honest stakeholder feedback that technical assistance efforts could follow up with. Self-assessed group and document ratings done in NAYC could also be, with programs' consent, that the ratings results could be submitted to NAYC and then shared back with state technical assistance efforts. We would be happy to talk with states about developing cooperative arrangements, or again, the state selectively receiving certain things that are of key interest to them that they could follow up on feedback with. Next slide. We also are going to go on to an enhanced and customized annual report process with our new data system that sets and then evaluates specific program improvement goals. And again, this could be integrated with QRIS systems. We expect to be able to do a lot more refined data reporting, and possibly states would be interested in sharing the group information within their state from NAYC programs to better understand qualities of programs in their state, and we expect to have that capability when we build out this new system shortly. So next slide. Going the other way, NAYC is interested in talking about accepting your state data to improve our system efficiency, that programs perhaps do not have to do stuff for NAYC because they've already done it for their QRIS. And for starters, the big obvious ones is that states are all developing professional development profiles on individuals. They have registries, and you guys are the experts on professional development in your state and how it's tailored to meet the needs you've identified in your state. I would hope that we could be able to share that data jointly and not have to ask programs to submit data to us as well. Something I've been wanting to do for a long time, but with 50 states out there, it's a little hard on our end in terms of capacity, is we know that there are state licensing regulations, some of which are about compliance with NAYC criteria. We'd like to be able to say, okay, if you're in state X and you have a 35 square foot interior space requirement, we don't have to assess that in any way, shape, or form because your licensing has already assessed that and you just meet. And we'd like to be able to to be advised by states what we can give credit for. Same thing with things at various QRIS levels. So if we have a program in accreditation that is already a level 3 in your state and we understand what additionally that means in terms of things they've met, that we don't have to ask them those questions or assess them on that it could be an abbreviated assessment. Those are all things that we're hoping to look at. And finally, if we go to the next slide, we are right in the middle of revising our assessment tools. And one thing we're doing is we're informing this new tool assessment with data we've already collected about how difficult various of these standards are within our system. We're developing multi-tiered observational rating tools for program improvement. So what we're anticipating doing is when we're done, being able to say, the criteria that you're going to be assessed on in a site visit are only a subset of all the criteria. Some of these criteria are relatively easy, and we would keep them on self-assessment instruments that programs starting their self-improvement process would be using. So they could be matched to certain tiered levels in your state. I mean, they could be customized too, or that we could generally come to an understanding of what are less difficult items, moderately difficult items, and more difficult items. We expect to use that in our accreditation process in that way. These could be made available to be used outside of the accreditation process too. We'd like to be able to make available self-assessment tools that you could use in your state as part of your QRIS. I know that there are some issues with the self-assessment use of some of the rating scales that are used for reliable rater assessment, and I just bring this out because we do hope we can offer an option to states that might be interested. Our revision is going to be derived from our current content of criteria, statements of best practice, but we hope clearer and more concise. One thing we learned is that sometimes we have very large statements that are a little difficult to understand. We're in the process of writing them in a clearer way and linked to definitions, examples, and resources, even more so than now. We do have a lot, but we hope to really beef this up. And as I said, organized by levels of difficulty, so the content can be engaged in steps. that's where we hope to go. Those are the lessons we took from this process, the things we're excited about, and the ways that we see that we can be integrated with QRIS systems to the benefit of the systems, NAYC, and of course the programs that we're all hoping to work with on quality improvement. So that's kind of, that's it, I think.
All right, this is Deb. I have a couple of questions, and Pam has posted the QRIS research link in the chat box. I also posted OCC's crosswalk between Head Start performance standards and accreditation, which might be of interest to folks in terms of looking and seeing. It's also crosswalk with Caring for Our Children, and I think a couple of other things. But that site might be interesting for you to go to just get an understanding of what does a crosswalk look like and how does it work a little more deeply. And Pam, thanks for posting your link there. I just had you also are doing, I think NAYC just as real leader in the field in terms of on your website, you're publishing research papers about what you're learning about quality, right?
Yes.
Susan, you have a Nook where, and that research can be very informative to states in their QRIS systems building.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been fun doing it. We recently put out a trend brief about how our content crosswalks with Strengthening Families content. We worked with them on a outside rating process and saw where there are complementary areas and then strengths in both systems in terms of how it approaches the topics of family engagement. And it's informing our further development of new emerging criteria on our side. We also, I think one of those trend briefs I really liked that I did, because it was interesting how it came out, was our standard on child assessment is got 5 topic areas, and they actually kind of go from the general to the specific. And we found that programs can have an assessment plan and they can have assessment materials, but when you start asking, yes, but do you actually do them? Do you actually individualize them? Do you actually engage them on a weekly basis and translate them into curriculum content alteration? Do you actually involve families thoroughly and share back and forth with them? It got harder and harder, you know. So we see that child assessment as an area where I think there is still a lot of improvement work to be done.
Right. Does the curriculum live on the shelf or in the classroom? Right. Kind of in the assessment.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
Very interesting.
And of course, we also see a lot of criteria related to recognizing diversity in various ways tend to be very challenging to programs. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we've been doing some analysis on our stuff.
If people want to follow up, they would follow up with you, and your information is on, I'll just click to this slide, is on the last slide here. If people wanted to follow up to discuss coordinating more robustly with NAYC, they would reach out to you, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
thanks,
great. My final, just real quick question, because we're almost out of time here, is I wonder if the state AEYCs could facilitate at least a beginning discussion about how the NAYC protocols and the state QRIS lined up, or help facilitate that work too, being more on the ground within the state. It was just popped into my head as you were talking.
Yes, I hope we can start engaging more with the state AEYCs also on this issue. We're also going out and talking to our state AEYCs more. So we're going to be on the ground in a lot of states this year too, because we want to be talking to everybody about how general efforts are going in your state and how people, you know, how programs are feeling about them, how administrators are feeling, and how we can align these processes in ways that are beneficial to everybody.
Well, I would just like to thank Pam and Susan, and I can hear the applause through all the phones. Thank you so much for a very informative discussion with us and for being so open to answering questions and dialoguing with us about your very interesting project in Massachusetts, and so informative to the rest of us in the work of our early childhood systems building. Thank you again.
Sure,
Thank you,
and if
Debbie.
anybody have any follow-up questions, feel free. You can Google EEC to find our state website, and I'm literally the only Pam in the entire agency, so I am exceedingly easy to find. So feel free to contact me with follow-up questions, or if you can't navigate our website, which frankly we have problems with ourselves.
Thank you so much again, Susan and Pam. Really appreciate having you on today. Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.